Dartmouth Cole Harbour has 4 minutes left to conclude his remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm again pleased to rise and speak to this important issue, and again want to thank my colleague, the member from New Westminster-Coquitlam, for bringing this important issue to our attention, to the attention of members of this House, and frankly, many tens of thousands of Canadians who have responded in an incredibly positive manner by agreeing with him, by agreeing with many members of this House that the finning of sharks at sea is an intolerable practice that needs to stop. I talked about this to some length in my earlier comments, Mr. Speaker, about how approximately 100 million sharks are being killed each year, primarily for their fins, shrinking the international shark population and resulting in the near extinction of dozens of species. I talked a bit last time I was on my feet about the poor-beagle shark, which has subsequently been listed as an extinct species that been listed, and it's one that is off the Atlantic coast, is off of Nova Scotia. The problem with that species is primarily in the as a bycatch, the damage that's done, but there are still a few a small directed fishery. There was a directed fishery with the poor beagle shark, and there was some attempt made international conference last fall to try to get Canada to recognize that here was another species that needed that was nearing extinction and that needed some controls put on fishing effort. Unfortunately, at that particular time, Canada decided not to act, but subsequently there has been some efforts in this regard. Mr. Speaker, there has been a fair bit of polling done of Canadians, of the general population, and the numbers, I believe, are over 80% of Canadians that are opposed to this practice and that would support a ban. There is likewise figures in the Asian community that are in a majority who also support the banning, support the measures that are proposed by this particular bill, and so the question needs to be asked, and that's what's being posed by the member who has sponsored this private member's bill. Why is it that we not show some leadership on such an important issue like this, move forward, again, show some leadership, take action, respond not only to the international nature of this problem, but recognize the will of the Canadian population by moving forward with a ban. Several municipalities have done likewise. It is not without its controversy, but we believe, Mr. Speaker, that it's time to act because it is the right thing to do. And surely in this House we can agree that sometimes we can act on the basis that it is the right thing to do. Thank you very much.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Dauphin, Swan River, Marquette.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'm very pleased to speak to this bill. And I must say, I don't doubt for a minute the sincerity of the member for Dartmouth Cole Harbour and New Westminster-Coquitlam. I have the honour of serving on the Fisheries Committee with them, and their dedication to fisheries conservation is well known. I would like to start by making it very clear that the practice of shark finning, defined in this bill as the practice of removing the fins from sharks and discarding the remainder of the sharks while at sea, is a deplorable activity. Up to 100 million sharks a year are killed, mostly for their fins, according to the UN FAO. I think I can say that from past discussions among representatives of all parties in the House there is agreement that sharks play a critical role in our ocean ecosystems, and the practice of shark finning, as defined above, is abhorrent. In 2007, Canada released its National Plan of Action for the Conservation and Management of Sharks in response to international calls on states to do so within the UN's Food and Agricultural Organization. 3 shark species are listed under the Convention on the International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora: the whale shark, the great white shark, and the basking shark. As a party to this agreement, often known as CITES, Canada takes seriously its obligation to prevent the import of products made from listed species. This having been said, it is important to make the distinction between shark finning and shark fishing. The practice of shark finning is already prohibited in Canada, has been so since 1994. On the other hand, Mr. Speaker, shark fishing does occur in Canada and has been occurring in Canada for over 80 years in many areas. Canada's shark fisheries are clearly sustainable and based on sound scientific advice. In fact, the Pacific spiny dogfish fishery recently became the first shark fishery to be certified as sustainable by the Marine Stewardship Council, a testament to the efficacy of the controls placed on that fishery by DFO. We have controls in place to manage shark fishing, just as we have controls in place for all commercial fisheries. These controls fulfill the government's duty to manage Canada's seacoast and inland fisheries on behalf of all of us. And just in case anybody was tempted to ask, I would note, I'll digress and talk a little bit about the budget that just came forward. We were very pleased to see that a new program is beginning, the conservation of fisheries through community partnerships. That's a testament to this government's action on behalf of fisheries conservation. And again, the dedication of the entire Pacific salmon stamp to Pacific salmon conservation is another milestone in Canadian fisheries conservation. Regarding sharks, all license holders for Canadian shark fisheries and for fisheries where sharks are landed as bycatch are subject to license conditions that prohibit them from engaging in shark finning. For example, license conditions pursuant to subsection 22.1 of the Fishery General Regulations are attached to porbeagle shark licenses and clearly state that while fishing under the authority of these license conditions, finning, the practice of removing only the fins from sharks and discarding the remainder of the shark at sea, is strictly prohibited. Canadian fishermen can also sustainably harvest sharks on the Atlantic and Pacific coast through directed fishing conditions for spiny dogfish and allowed bycatch of blue, shortfin mako, and porbeagle sharks. However, annual landings of these sharks are very small. Further, if the license holder removes fins from any shark that he or she has retained, the weight of the fins so removed cannot exceed 5% of the weight of the corresponding dressed shark carcasses that have been retained. In other words, Mr. Speaker, a license holder that has legally caught a shark can remove the fin of that shark as part of the normal dressing of a fish. Finally, to ensure compliance, all shark fins and carcasses must be unloaded at the same time. These measures are specifically to ensure that shark finning is not taking place. Fisheries and Oceans Canada is also responsible for setting the quotas and for enforcing license conditions that ensure sustainability. As mentioned earlier, shark fins cannot make up more than 5% of the overall weight of shark on board a Canadian fishing vessel. And in order to enforce this, Mr. Speaker, all landings are subject to 100% monitoring by dockside observers to ensure compliance. Non-compliance with a license condition constitute an offence under the Fisheries Act and as enforced by Fisheries and Oceans Canada. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency, CFIA, is the federal department dedicated to safeguarding food, animals, and plants, which enhances the health and well-being of Canada's people, environment, and economy. CFIA regulates the imports of food products such as shark fins. CFIA is already exploring what can be done on the importation of shark fins. Shark products for human consumption fall under regulations that address the importation of fish and seafood products. These regulations set standards for quality, safety, identification, and are enforced by CFIA. It is not illegal to sell shark fins in Canada, and banning the use of shark fins would damage legitimate, sustainable fisheries which supply fins, but also other shark products. The Department of Fisheries and Oceans promotes the full utilization of sharks. And I would note that shark fins are a specialty food product and a treasured food resource for many of Canada's communities. The fact remains that shark fishing is a legitimate fishery and its products are found in numerous places. Shark meat is available in restaurants and supermarkets under many names: fish strips, stockfish, rock salmon in fish and chips, or an imitation crab meat. This is probably more than anybody ever wanted to know about sharks, but here it is. In the health sector, shark cartilage powder is marketed as a healthy food supplement. Shark liver oil is rich in vitamin A and is frequently an ingredient in every child's favorite food, cod liver oil. Some even market shark cartilage as an anti-cancer medicine, though evidence is still being sought in this regard. Shark products are found in dog food, fish meal, and even in fertilizers. And some of you may even have shark skin wallets or boots. Who knows? Collagen from shark cartilage is used in creams and other collagen preparations, and it's even considered kosher. The Convention on the International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, at its triennial conference in Bangkok, March 3rd to 14th of this year, took decisive action for the protection of a wide range of other plants and animals in order to improve the world's wildlife trade. At this meeting, Canada fully supported the decision to include protection for 5 commercially valuable shark species: the ocean whitetip, the scalloped hammerhead, and I'll refrain from any hammerhead jokes, the great hammerhead shark, the smooth hammerhead, and the porbeagle shark, which are harvested in significant numbers for their valuable fins. This decision means that they can only be traded with CITES permits, and evidence will have to be provided that they are harvested sustainably and legally. In fact, the only criteria for fisheries management should be the sustainability of the fisheries resource, not polls. The regulations governing the trade of these products will come into effect in 2014. These new listings join those for 3 species already under CITES protection: the great white shark, the whale shark, and the basking shark. I would like to quote the CITES Secretary General John E. Scanlon, who said, quote, "This is a big day for CITES and for the world's wildlife. It takes enormous effort to negotiate treaties and then make them work. The international community has today decided to make best use of this pragmatic and effective agreement to help it along the path to sustainability in our oceans and forests. Requiring CITES export permits will ensure that international markets are supplied by fish from sustainably managed fisheries." And again, sustainability should be the only criterion. I would note that Canada believes, what has happened as well, given the CITES agreements, is that in China, one of the world's biggest markets for shark fins, we're already seeing the impacts of the World Campaign. Shark fin imports to China dropped off dramatically last year to 3,351 tons from 10,340 tons in 2011. Canada believes that working through regional fisheries management organizations to ensure strong management and enforcement practices globally is the most effective way to prevent unsustainable shark fishing practices. A complete trade ban would penalize responsible, legitimate fishing practices. Mr. Speaker, C-380 can be seen as interference in the legitimate natural resource management policies of other countries. We must be very careful here. Canada has become a target of ill-thought-out and disgraceful campaigns by international activist organizations for what are very sustainable natural resource industries. We can look at the seal hunt, forestry, and of course the oil sands. This bill, C-380, sets a very bad precedent, is overbroad, and could unfairly target sustainable fisheries around the world, just as many rural Canadian communities have been unfairly targeted even when science shows their resource use is sustainable and managed well. There is a role for Canada to promote responsible resource management in international waters and fisheries, but we must ensure that we follow the appropriate international channels and do not act unilaterally. Mr. Speaker, as you can see, actions have been taken domestically and internationally to end the practice of shark finning, and they are effective. The measures in C-380 do not add anything further to our current efforts, and that is why we will not be supporting this bill. Thank you.
Excellent remarks. Resuming debate, the honourable member for Winnipeg North.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And maybe to be really clear on this, the whole idea of shark finning is something in which we would argue is cruel, inhumane. It has a very strong negative impact on the shark population in our oceans around the world, and to the degree in which it puts some into the threat of extinction. Mr. Speaker, there is no justification whatsoever for shark finning, And at the end of the day, I believe this is an issue that has been there for a number of years. In fact, you could go back to 1994 when Jean Chrétien, former Prime Minister of Canada, introduced a ban here in Canada. And when we take a look at this particular bill, Mr. Speaker, if amended, it could have some potential to reinforce what we believe a good number of Canadians believe, Mr. Speaker, and that is, of course, as I've stated, that shark finning is in fact completely unacceptable in the circumstances where you have sharks being thrown back into our oceans, and it's just to take the fin as the consumable product and getting rid of the carcass. Mr. Speaker, most Canadians will have their experience by watching shows and news. You see the majestic shows or documentaries which clearly show the role sharks have played in our oceans around the world, not only today but for hundreds of thousands of years. Then you'll see the news broadcasts that show paint a very ugly picture in terms of just exactly what it is that shark finning that takes place on all of our oceans, Mr. Speaker, where you'll have a boat in the ocean hauling up a shark where it is quickly definned and then thrown back into the water, left to drown and ultimately die, and the body would then decompose. Mr. Speaker, these are the ads that we see, whether it's on YouTube, the documentaries, or the newscasts, that many Canadians have had the opportunity to see. And it has influenced their opinions on the issue. And I believe at the end of the day what you will find is that, generally speaking, when you talk about shark finning, and that it is seen in a very negative light. And as it should be, Mr. Speaker, I suspect that there's very few Canadians that would support the type of shark finning that we see where the carcass is disposed of. Mr. Speaker, having said that, I wanted to highlight the fact that this is, as an issue, has been there, and the Liberal Party has taken, I believe, a responsible approach with this issue. And we started that back in 1994 when we brought in the legislation to ban it outright here in terms of our own fisheries. And that has been talked about. Many other countries have followed what I would argue is Canada's lead in terms of banning fishing or shark finning. And we applaud those efforts, those countries that have seen the value in doing what Canada had done in terms of banning shark finning. But, Mr. Speaker, sadly, there are still many countries that do not see this for what it is, as an inhumane treatment of a shark, Mr. Speaker, and they continue to allow shark finning to occur. There are many businesses and entrepreneurs that are out there that continue to practice this disgusting measure, and we are right to do what we can to send the right messages, to pass the right laws in order to do what we can to prevent this illegal shark finning from taking place, Mr. Speaker. And to that extent, we do believe that in looking at this particular bill, to have it go to committee would be a positive thing, Mr. Speaker, in the sense that in committee it would be our intent to propose amendments to make the legislation more acceptable, Mr. Speaker, because as it stands today, it is not acceptable. We need to recognize that there is two types of shark finning that does occur. And what is so offensive is those that take the fin and dispose of the carcass. And, Mr. Speaker, you will find that throughout the world, many countries, there is a legitimate harvesting of sharks that takes place, and where that occurs, those fins are in fact properly packed and ultimately end up here in Canada. And those are done completely legally, Mr. Speaker. There are many benefits for that to allow to continue. And ultimately, Mr. Speaker, one could argue that we need to be culturally sensitive because there are cultures here in Canada that put a great deal of value to shark fins. And because they assign value to shark fins, it does not justify the House of Commons ultimately putting into place an outright ban on shark fins. And that is in essence what this bill will do if it is not amended, Mr. Speaker. And that is the reason why, yes, we are offended by illegal shark finning that takes place worldwide, but we are also going to recognize both the economic and social benefits of allowing properly harvested shark fins to be able to continue to be and arrive here in Canada, Mr. Speaker. I think it's important for us to distinguish that, Mr. Speaker. We have seen city councils in other jurisdictions, states, many states in the United States, but city councils here in Canada attempt to deal with this issue, Mr. Speaker, where they've seen bylaws passed. It was, I believe, in 2011 or in and around there, where Toronto attempted to ban shark finning. And there was a court ruling that overturned it, and I'm not sure exactly where Toronto is right now, but I believe that in most part, most politicians recognize the sensitivity of the issue and see the value of allowing properly harvested shark fins to be able to come into to Canada. And Mr. Speaker, I'm very much aware of how sometimes words can be twisted, and I would caution members, in particular those that might want to twist these words, because at the end of the day, you know, I've had opportunity to talk to youth on the issue, of individuals of all ages on this issue, but in particular youth. It's very easy to go into a classroom and paint this picture of the brutality and inhumane manner in which sharks are being exploited for their fins and generate huge opposition to that. It appalls me, it appalls my constituents, it appalls Canadians when that occurs, Mr. Speaker. But that is quite different than those countries that have established laws and regulations to protect our fishery industries, including sharks, Mr. Speaker, where it is legally done in a humane fashion, Mr. Speaker, and then packaged accordingly. We have to be very careful in terms of not to lump all as one, Mr. Speaker, in this situation. I have suggested and recommended to my caucus colleagues, because it is a private member's bill, that we allow the bill, in fact, to go to committee so that we can hopefully achieve the amendments that would ultimately see what I believe a vast majority of the public want, and that is to target the illegal shark finning that's taking place worldwide, hit it hard as possible, Mr. Speaker, but not necessarily to penalize the social and economic considerations that need to be taken here in Canada and looking at the fishing as an industry as a whole. So I appreciate the opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to be able to address this issue. Thank you.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for British Columbia, Southern Interior.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleagues for that applause. It is indeed a pleasure for me today to offer support for Bill C-380, an act to amend the Fish Inspection Act and Fisheries Act by prohibiting the import of shark fins that are not attached to the rest of the shark and enshrine in legislation Canada's prohibition on finning. I would like to thank and I applaud my colleague from Westminster-Coquitlam for his courage in raising this important issue. As we all know, Mr. Speaker, the illegal trade of animal body parts exists in the world. Ivory and rhino horns from Africa, tiger parts from Siberia, bear parts from North America. Mr. Speaker, I'm not a hunter, but I understand full well the practice of killing animals for food, where it is done in a responsible way to feed people. In fact, you might say that shooting a deer in the wild could be considered even more humane than, putting animals through a slaughterhouse. However, as a meat eater, most of us are, and we accept all of these practices. On the other hand, killing animals for trophy or body parts, in my opinion, is totally reprehensible. That's why I don't support, for example, the hunting of grizzlies in my province or anywhere else for that matter. I have seen the documentary Shark Water and have watched how sharks are caught, their fins cut off and how they're thrown back in the water. This practice is repulsive and immoral and is largely driven by an underground market controlled by organized crime which exploits threatened and endangered species to maximize profits.
Mr. Speaker, nearly 100 million sharks are killed each year, primarily for their fins. This practice is underregulated, and it's virtually impossible to ensure that the fins have not been illegally harvested or don't come from threatened species, endangered species. Shark populations reproduce slowly and cannot support the current overfishing. Sharks are essential to the health of the marine ecosystem, and declines in their population might well perturb these ecosystems. In 2009, the International Union of Nature Conservancy reported that 1/3 of shark species were currently threatened with extinction because of this trade. Mr. Speaker, in just a few decades, the shark population in certain regions have dropped by 95% and continue to decline. According to some experts, up to 20 species of shark could disappear completely by 2017. In addition, it's impossible to know if the fins that have been imported come from a sustainable, respectful fishery. Mr. Speaker, a shark fin soup is sold today at between $8 and $100 a bowl. However, in Canada, like abroad, more and more people are refusing to serve or to eat this soup, and many Chinese restaurants have voluntarily withdrawn the soup from their menus. That is the case of the Flota restaurant in Vancouver, which is one of the largest Chinese restaurants in the country. There are also municipalities in the country that have adopted or will soon adopt regulations banning the sale of shark fins and their byproducts. In British Columbia, I'm referring to the municipalities of Coquitlam, Abbotsford, Duncan, Langley, the Canton of Langley, Maple Ridge, Nanaimo, New Westminster, North Vancouver, Port Moody, and White Rock. Bravo! I congratulate the municipal councils for having had the courage to adopt these regulations. Mr. Speaker, the Chinese government has demanded that shark fin soup no longer be served during state banquets, and several prestigious hotels have withdrawn the soup from their menus. Many countries, the Bahamas, Ecuador, and Fiji, territories, French Polynesia, Guam, the Northern Marianas, and states in the U.S., including California, Hawaii, Illinois, Oregon, and Washington, have also issued similar bans. As for the commerce, there are some saying that Bill C-380 will have an impact on international trade in this product. Based on our research, that isn't the case. We have studied the consequences of an import ban under WTO obligations, and we feel that this bill does comply with WTO regulations in Canada. My colleague for New Westminster is open to amendments at committee stage.
committee to address any concerns that anyone has. Mr. Speaker, there's a number of myths out there about Canada's current shark fin import laws. Some elected members have suggested that Bill C-380 is unnecessary because Canada already has enough laws and that Canada bases the trade of shark products from species protected under the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Flora and Fauna, CITES, or on the Species at Risk Act. According to the Canadian branch of Humane Society International, this is false. Both CITES and SARA only protect 3 species of sharks: basking sharks, whale sharks, and great white sharks. In other words, out of 141 threatened or near threatened shark species, only 3 are protected by Canadian federal laws. Another myth we hear is that Canada bans or restricts the trade, possession, or sale of shark products that present human health or safety concerns. Well, this is also false. Shark fins, which continue to be legally imported into Canada, contain high concentrations of a potent neurotoxin, BMAA, which scientists have linked to neurodegenerative diseases in humans such as Alzheimer's and Lou Gehrig disease. This is not unlike, for example, the link between phenylbutazone in horse meat and aplastic anemia in children. The third myth states that working through regional fisheries management organizations to ensure strong global management and enforcement practices is the most effective way to prevent unsustainable shark finning practices such as finning. This is also false. As long as there is a demand for shark fins, there will be a local industry pressure on governments not to prohibit the practice. This demand will also perpetuate the poaching of sharks in the waters of countries which already prohibit finning. Canada has already been identified, for example, by CSIS as a destination country for poached shark fins from Australia, even though some Australian states have some of the world's strongest shark finning laws. So eliminating the demand removes the incentive for fishermen to continue finning and poaching sharks. So there you have it, Mr. Speaker. We have a chance here in this House to do something right together, to take a major step and end this disgusting practice. As a bare minimum, I strongly urge my colleagues who are here and others who will be here later on to support getting C-380 to committee, where there can be a detailed study with feedback from witnesses, as is the case in a democratic process. And I'd just like to add, Mr. Speaker, it doesn't hurt in any of these crucial issues to have some more insurance. If we think we have good laws, well, let's beef them up. Let's provide some more insurance to toughen them up. You can always ease back on a law after you've toughened it up, but it's really hard to try to enforce something when you don't have the legislative background to do it. For this reason, I urge once again my colleagues to support C-380, and I thank my colleague from Westminster-Coquitlam for having taken the initiative of bringing it forward. Merci beaucoup.
The honourable member, resuming debate, the honourable member for Medicine Hat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to speak on the important issue of shark finning. As others have said, I am confident that the consensus among all parliamentarians is that shark finning is a barbaric practice. We all agree on this. The question is how to deal with the issue in an effective way, and Bill C-380 is not the way. And why is that? Because the bill calls for a ban on shark finning, and shark finning is already banned in Canada for Canadian licensed vessels fishing within and beyond our territorial waters. In fact, the practice has been banned in Canada since 1994 through license conditions under the Fisheries General Regulations. Import license requirements, Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to stand here before the House and report that our government is exploring options to identify a practical, effective, and expeditious resolution to this issue. Specifically, our government is exploring the option to add additional conditions to arrangements that would require that shark fin imports be sourced from jurisdictions that, like Canada, ban the practice of shark finning. That way, we would bolster our domestic ban on this abhorrent practice by putting more teeth, if you will, into our import protocols. The course of this action would both respect Canada's international trade obligations and address the issue of shark finning. And best of all, Mr. Speaker, once all the appropriate considerations are addressed, the new import requirements would be implemented more quickly than a regulatory change. So we have listened and we are taking action to address the major concerns of this proposed bill. So what are the current regulations, Mr. Speaker? Recently, the issue of shark finning has received worldwide attention as a number of animal rights and environmental organizations have blamed it for the decline of shark populations worldwide. These groups claim that between 70 and 100 million sharks are caught worldwide, just for their fins, primarily for shark fin soup. The practice of shark finning can be lucrative, yielding as much as $700 a pound for shark fins. Thanks to our government's regulations, shark fishing in Canada is governed by sustainable management plans and strong enforcement. We have strong management and enforcement regimes in place to ensure that finning does not occur in Canadian fisheries. These apply to all shark species in Canadian waters. The shark fisheries are subject to dockside monitoring, at-sea observer coverage, quota monitoring systems, electronic vessel monitoring system, and hail requirements for both the at-sea observer program and dockside monitoring program. The Fisheries Act is the cornerstone of Canada's fisheries management policy, providing broad powers to the Minister for the management, conservation, and protection of fish resources. These powers include discretion to 1. Issue licenses for fisheries or fishing, 2. Allocate harvests among user groups, and 3. Protect fish habitat and prevent pollution. Section 22 of the regulations provide the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans the specific authority to set out targeted license conditions for the proper management and control of fisheries and the conservation and protection of fish, including sharks. These provisions provide the Minister with the authority to impose, as a license condition, measures to eliminate shark finning. So the regs already allow the Minister to impose, as a license condition, measures to eliminate shark finning. Therefore, the member's bill seeks to prevent something from happening in Canada that is already prohibited. Today, all license holders for Canadian shark fisheries and for fisheries where sharks are landed as a bycatch are subject to license conditions that prohibit them from engaging in shark finning. The ban is enforced through a number of different internationally accepted methods across Canada. One approach requires that the number of fins corresponds with the number of shark carcasses landed by shark fishing vessels. Under a second and more common approach, the number of fins on shark fishing vessels cannot exceed 5% of the overall weight of carcasses on board when it lands. Both methods are intended to ensure that sharks are not caught being solely for their fins. All licensed shark fishing vessels in Canada are subject to 100%, I repeat that, Mr. Speaker, 100% monitoring to ensure that this ratio is respected. Any violation of a license condition is an offence under the Fisheries Act. Penalties for those found to be in contravention of their conditions of license range from 1. Warnings to, 2. Prosecution to, 3. Requests for court-imposed license suspensions and quota penalties, and 4. Loss of privilege of renewal of an exploratory license. These measures were put in place to ensure that Canada's shark fishing conforms to sustainable harvesting practices. It's a very practical approach, and it has worked well. I would add, Mr. Speaker, that Canada's approach is internationally accepted standard within regional fisheries management organizations. Additionally, Canada has worked with other countries to put an end to this practice. Our government will continue to work with our international partners to ensure sustainable management of sharks, including the prohibition of the practice of finning. Internationally, we promote the sustainable management and conservation of sharks through international organizations, including the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization and the regional fisheries management bodies, such as the International Commission for the Conservation of Atlantic Tuna. There are also a number of international agreements to which Canada is a party that govern the conservation, management, and trade of certain at-risk shark species. For instance, the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora protect the great white basking and whale sharks. And in early March in Bangkok, the convention voted at a global wildlife conference to regulate the trade of shark species that have been threatened because their fins are used to make expensive delicacies in Asia. Delegates proposed to put the oceanic white-tip, hammerhead, and port beagle sharks on a list of species whose trade is closely controlled. More than 24 species of sharks are officially endangered and more than 100 others considered either vulnerable or near threatened. Imports of these shark species or any other parts into Canada is only permissible if accompanied by an export permit from a country of origin which certifies that the imported shark or products derived from it were caught in a scientifically proven sustainable fishery. Mr. Speaker, our government has taken action against the deplorable practice of illegal shark finning. We continue to support reasonable, legal shark harvesters and crack down on those who break the rules. Furthermore, to strengthen Canada's protection of sharks, we are exploring the option to add additional conditions for fish and seafood imports into Canada that would require that shark fin imports be sourced from jurisdictions that, like Canada, ban the practice of shark finning. We believe these measures in place, Private Member's Bill C-380, is not required, and we will oppose it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
On la prise de débat.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Sherbrooke. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for your warm welcome, colleagues. It's a pleasure for me to speak to Bill C-380, put forward by my colleague from New Westminster-Coquitlam. That member works very hard and has consulted broadly on this issue, and there appears to be a consensus around this bill, except, obviously, for the Conservatives. And we're used to that from them, opposing such a logical bill. So I'm going to try to convince them today, because I think there'll be a vote on Wednesday, if I'm not mistaken, and I hope we'll be able to gain the support of enough members here in the House to pass this bill and refer it to committee. So today we're at second reading of the bill, and it's important for me to take the floor to express my support, obviously, on behalf of my NDP colleagues. I know the Liberals, too, will be supporting this bill. And I hope that the Conservatives will come around as well, because this is a historic moment in the attempt to stop this major problem, worldwide problem, which is very harmful to our ecosystems. When I study a bill, it's my practice to read the text thoroughly, and this bill is quite straightforward. There are two major points to it. A change to the Fish Inspection Act that would ban the import of shark fins that are separated from the rest of the carcass. That's an important part of it. They separate the fin from the carcass, and I'll go into that in greater detail later. The second important point is that the bill would amend the Fisheries Act. It would ban finning. That as a practice, it would ban the practice of removing shark fins. So there are two provisions. It's very straightforward, it's very simple, and I support that. So now if we look at the Fish Inspection Act, this bill would amend Section 3 by adding Section 3.1, which would provide for a ban on finning, except with a permit, but that's essentially a ban with a minor exception. The second clause is an amendment to the Fisheries Act. It would add section 32.1 saying that no person shall engage in the practice of shark finning, and then it proceeds to define shark finning. So those are the two specific amendments that this bill would bring about. And why is that important? Why has my colleague decided to present this bill? The reason is quite simple. There's a very serious problem right now in our oceans. We're losing whole species of sharks. About 1/3 of shark species are currently at risk of extinction. So it's an urgent problem we're trying to solve here today. If Canada makes an effort, obviously, this isn't going to change things overnight. The practice isn't going to disappear overnight, but at least Canada will have sent a very clear signal saying that here we're taking steps to try to reduce the practice as much as possible because we're aware of the problem it's causing. The situation is critical right now, and we have to take action to protect and conserve our marine ecosystems. And sharks are at the top of the food chain in our oceans. It's a very important fish to the survival of the ecosystem generally. And of course this is important to us because if most sharks were to become extinct, well, that's a key part of the ecosystem. I'll give you some important figures that were mentioned. I think all members have basically mentioned that about 100 million sharks are killed every year for their fins. If this continues, up to 20 species could disappear by 2017. Another important figure, Canada imports a little over 100 tons of shark fins per year. And as other colleagues have said, and there was a report that said that test was done in BC to show how easy it was to get shark fins in Canada. 76% of shark fins came from species at risk of extinction. So what that means is that most of the shark fins that wind up in Canada come from endangered species of shark. Why do we find this practice so barbarous or abhorrent? It's inhumane what they're doing. They put out very long lines to try to catch sharks, but many other species are killed in the process. And at times the sharks are still alive when they're pulled aboard. Their fins are cut off and they're thrown back into the sea, discarded, still alive, to die a horrible life because they can no longer swim without their fins. So the practice is, it's hard to believe. When I saw the documentary recently, I was surprised and even I was quite disappointed to see that man was capable of such disrespect for nature. Torture, really. It's torture. Torture practiced on animals. So I think it's important that Canada send a very clear signal, as I mentioned before, and this bill gives us the opportunity to do just that. So we condemn the practice. And earlier I heard a colleague saying that this could be harmful to the economy. Well, we know that shark meat is not something that people eat a lot of. When shark is fished, it's usually just for their fin, because I think the meat has a lot of mercury in it. It's not very safe to eat. So that argument is a bit defective, suggesting that the shark fishery could be harmful to the economy, the ban could be harmful to the economy. I think that's a bit far-fetched. And this is, if you will, in keeping with the values of the communities that do eat shark fin. I have a colleague from Brossard-la-Prairie who spoke to that point. She said that most communities, the new generation, are in fact against this practice. Many countries have already banned shark fin imports, including the Chinese government even put limits on it. They didn't want to use shark fin at official banquets. So even the government of China has sent a signal saying that they're not fully in agreement with this practice, which is endangering our ecosystems. So I think to wrap up, since I don't have much time left, I'd just like to once again thank my colleague and congratulate him because he's taken it upon himself to send a message that we're not okay with this practice. We don't want to take part in that trade. So this sends a very clear signal to the international community that we take this seriously. We want to protect our ecosystems. We want the environment protected for future generations who will be here for years, and they'll have to live with the consequences if we don't immediately put an end to this. So on that point, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to encourage all parties and all my colleagues to support this bill, send it to committee, make changes if needed, because I know my colleague would also be open to reasonable amendments at committee. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before recognizing the honourable member for Berthier-Masquinongé on resuming debate, it's my duty to inform the member that there's only 3 minutes left for her speech, because in order to leave enough time for the right of reply. So 3 minutes, the honourable member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to support the bill put forward by my colleague for New Westminster-Coquitlam, Bill C-380. In brief, this bill would amend the Fish Inspection Act by banning shark fin imports when they're no longer attached to the rest of the shark. It would also amend the Fisheries Act by providing that Canada bans the practice of removing shark fins. As it's been mentioned a number of times, but it's worth repeating, up to 100 million sharks of all species, even endangered species, are victims of finning and overfishing. This number goes beyond the level that's biologically sustainable. Sharks are absolutely indispensable to the health of our oceans in the long term. Their disappearance would have unpredictable consequences for the ocean, for marine habitats, and for fishing areas. The trade in shark fins is a horrific practice. They cut the fins off the living sharks on fishing boats and then discard the still alive carcass into the ocean. It gives me goosebumps just thinking about it. So I support this bill wholeheartedly. A poll done by the Humane Society in 2013 showed that 81% of Canadians would support a ban on shark fin imports. I've studied this question from all angles, and I can see that there are good reasons for going forward with a ban on shark fin imports. We are elected to represent the interests of Canadians in the House of Commons. Statistics show clearly that the import of shark fins should be banned. The Mustel Group, their data is very similar to the Humane Society, And with the 2 minutes I have left, I'd like to congratulate my colleague from New Westminster-Coquitlam for all his work on this issue. I think he's put together a very balanced bill. It's the product of extensive consultation. I congratulate him, and I'm anxious to see what's going to happen when we vote on this, because I think it's very important to protect our ecosystems. We need to make the world a better place for our children, so I'm really looking forward to seeing the result. I really hope his bill will be referred to committee. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I now invite the honourable member for New Westminster-Coquitlam for his 5-minute right of reply. The honourable member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank my honourable colleagues for participating in this second hour of debate on my private member's bill C-380, which seeks to ban the importation of shark fins to Canada and enshrine in legislation Canada's current prohibition on shark finning. I'd like to conclude second reading debate on this bill by addressing a few key points. First of all, there's strong need for this ban. The first hour of debate, since the first hour of debate, an important new study has come out. Authored by a group of well-respected scientists, it found approximately 100 million sharks are killed each year, although they state this number could range as high as 273 million, which is far above sustainable fishing levels. And it concludes, quote, global total shark mortality needs to be reduced drastically in order to rebuild depleted populations and restore marine ecosystems with functional top predators, unquote. Its findings gained international media attention, for they provided further evidence that the global shark fin trade is driving the depletion and likely extinction of numerous shark species around the world. Canada can become a world leader in shark conservation and ocean stewardship by moving forward with a shark fin import ban, which will prevent over 100 tons of shark fins from being imported to Canada each year. The shark fin trade in Canada, which currently Canada participates, drives the horrific practice of shark finning, and many of my colleagues have spoken to that. It drives the illegal targeting of threatened and endangered species, some of which are supposed to be protected under CITES. Earlier this year, I sent each of my colleagues a DVD of the film Shark Water, which shows how, even in jurisdictions that have banned shark or finning, organized crime drives a hugely profitable black market. In Canada, recent DNA testing has proven that fins from endangered sharks are commonly imported into the country. In 2012, testing of 56 fins obtained in Vancouver and Richmond stores showed 76% came from threatened and endangered sharks. 76%, Mr. Speaker. Similar results were obtained from a 2010 study. Mr. Speaker, in Canada, we've seen numerous municipalities move forward with local bans on the sale and trade of shark fin. They are explicitly asking the federal government also to take action. There's no excuse for the government to drag its feet on this time-sensitive conservation crisis. Experts predict that if current trends continue, up to 20 shark species could become functionally extinct within this decade. And in a few decades, some regional shark populations may decline over 95%. Mr. Speaker, shark conservation is an issue that Canadians care deeply about. They recognize the grave threat posed to ocean health by the continued targeting of these important apex predators. Sharkwater filmmaker Rob Stewart, who wrote to MPs this week in support of my bill, stated, quote, the removal of sharks from marine ecosystems will gravely destabilize the balance of the oceans and may lead to the eventual disappearance of other populations, including commercially caught fish and shellfish species lower in the food chain. We need to take action in order to avoid a potential ecological crisis, unquote. I'd also like to draw my colleagues' attention to an editorial published in the Toronto Star yesterday. Authored by City Councillors Kristen Wantam of Toronto and Carrie Jiang of Vancouver, as well as Joanna Hui, founder of the Ethical Chinese Consumers Alliance. They state, quote, banning shark fins is not an attack on Chinese culture, unquote. All three are leaders in the Chinese-Canadian community. All three are leading efforts to halt the trade of shark fin. They also point out that Canada and around the world, Chinese leaders are the ones leading and supporting efforts to implement bans on the shark fin trade. A poll by Environics released last week indicated 81% of Canadians would support a federal importation ban on shark fins. The world has acted before to stop the targeting of elephants for their ivory, rhinos for their horns. Sharks are another example of demand for a single high-value animal part driving the unsustainable slaughter and waste of an entire animal. Mr. Speaker, it is imperative that Canada take immediate action to halt our role in the destructive and often illegal shark fin trade. The health of our oceans is at risk, and as is the survival of sharks. I ask all colleagues to support my private member's bill. Let's get this important bill before committee so that it can be thoroughly studied. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear.